Hello, and thank you for having us. I'm Dorothea Salo from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I'm sharing this presentation with my DataDoubles colleague, Abigail Goben of the University of Illinois, Chicago. DataDoubles is a 3-year research project investigating undergraduate perceptions of privacy with respect to big data in higher education, or learning analytics, as it's usually called, especially when libraries get involved in learning analytics. Our research colleagues hail from across the United States, saving my presence, a distinguished and wonderful group of people. The work was funded by the Institute of Museum and Library Services, to whom we are of course very grateful, and for whom we of course do not speak. So when we started, there was very little research addressing learning analytics and its student privacy issues that actually talked to students. There's a bit more now, thankfully, because we weren't the only people to notice the gap. We operated from 2 guiding research questions. How do learning analytics initiatives align with and/or run counter to student expectations of privacy? And how might libraries and institutions maximize the benefits of learning analytics while respecting student privacy expectations? We started off with structured interviews with students to give them maximum voice and to look for privacy-related themes in what students told us without presupposing what those themes would be. We then used the themes we discovered in the interviews to construct a survey that we could send to a much larger number of students across our institutions. And then we reached the phase we'll be talking to you about today, phase 3. For that, we built 3 reasonably plausible scenarios to run by student focus groups, and we asked whether the scenarios respected or broke their expectations of privacy. Let's briefly look at what we learned from the first 2 phases, and let's be clear that these phases took place pre-pandemic. We can't help thinking that if we reran them today, students might have some different answers. But here's what we did find. Students don't know a whole lot about their data generally, and their campus data in particular. But we did notice in the interviews that some of them were actually thinking it through while talking to us. They do recognize that when they interact with institutional services and systems, data is likely being collected about that for analysis. Some students were more laissez-faire about their own data, but still recognized that other students felt differently. And they thought those students deserved the data protections that they wanted. They were adamant that some information is super sensitive and needs rigorous access limitations. Data that's health related, especially mental health related, came up most often. They also drew a bright line about sharing student data with third parties. They are not in favor. From the survey, we learned that contrary to popular belief, students overwhelmingly do value their own privacy. And they see what privacy accomplishes for them in terms of intellectual and individual autonomy, freedom of association, freedom from interference, and so on. So that's something the community at this conference will have to reckon with. When we asked about specific types of data, we learned that financial and health information is felt to be most private, with academic advising notes and campus geo-tracking next in line. Even the data type they were on balance least concerned with, library resource use, had 25% of respondents insisting that it should be completely private. So we have to ask you all, how are your data warehouse practices accommodating that 1/4 of your student base? Half of them also don't want other staff, including IT folks, as best we can tell, messing around in their personally identifiable data. If that's shocking to you, let us as librarians say, we were pretty shocked at coming out on top here, and we can't entirely explain this result, though we do have ideas about it. And now I will turn it over to my colleague, Abigail.
Okay, thank you, Dorothea. So let's move on to our findings from the phase 3 focus group. So as we said, we developed 3 scenarios for discussion and conducted a focus group for each scenario at each of our team's institutions for a total of 21 focus groups. Once we explained the scenario and had given them a chance to react, we asked them to reach a consensus around what would help them to trust the scenario and what would enable them to feel that the scenario respected their privacy. Now, this phase did happen during the pandemic, so we held those focus groups on Zoom. We learned a lot about how to do this, and that might be useful to you. So 3 of our team members published a piece on exactly that. You can find that on our OSF site. It's the library data warehouse scenario that we want to focus on today for probably obvious reasons. We told them that their university library is planning to centralize different kinds of data, library data, into a data warehouse. And then that data would be combined with other data like their academic records and student profiles for analysis. Once they discussed that, we made some changes to the initial scenario. We asked them if their individual identifiability made a difference. We also asked what they felt about the data being used for non-academic purposes and what they felt about the data being used broadly across the institution rather than just within the library. What we found is that students understood the logic behind data collection, but had concerns about broadened access to the data. They also didn't want to be individually identifiable, and they thought data collection could definitely be too granular for their comfort. They didn't think the justifications we provided were enough to warrant the existence of the warehouse. And they also noted that for a lot of data, there were less intrusive ways of gaining it, including directly asking students. One student at UIC said surveys would still be fairly accurate and can be used to accomplish those administrative and educational purposes where you don't need to be monitoring students' every single move. Overall, we found a strong preference for de-identified data, with the caveat that only a very few students understood re-identification risks. Students also expected that data analysis would be limited to targeted and narrow education-specific uses, and they expected direct individual benefit from that analysis. Perhaps our strongest finding was that students expected to be able to consent to data collection and to use, not just generally, but specifically consent, and for each act of collection and analysis. They had a lot of different ideas about how and when consent would happen, but they were crystal clear that they expected to be able to say yes or no and have that choice respected. We also happened on an unexpected natural experiment in a different scenario involving geo-tracking students that we'd like to share with you. In 2019, the student newspaper at Northwestern University, which was one of our research sites, published photographs of student protests over a campus visit by then Attorney General Jeff Sessions. The students also named at least one student protester, raising student worries about university disciplinary action. In our geo-tracking scenario, Northwestern students understood that geo-tracking could be used to target students for punishment, the same way that photographs could be. And on that basis, absolutely refused to accept it. This was unique among the 7 focus groups on geo-tracking. What it communicated to us was that one sensitive incident, one, can be enough to demolish student trust in institutional data handling. We've learned so much from the last 3 years of work, but here's how we boil it down and what we hope you'll take away from it. Involve students in learning analytics and data warehouse development, and be transparent and detailed about what you're doing and why you're doing it. Northwestern and that example demonstrates to us that student trust can be quickly and irrevocably lost, and this loss is dangerous. Those students will be alumni someday, but we're not sure that they're going to be donors. And finally, our results by demographic are limited to what we asked in the survey, but we did see some extra caution from some groups of students, whether that was on racial or ethnic lines, or political affiliation lines. All students understood, though, that not everyone feels the same way that they do about privacy, and they tended to articulate that the most cautious students deserve to have their caution respected. There's so much more that we have learned and explored that we don't have time for today, but we've set up a number of resources where you can find out more about our work. You can find our publications, presentations, and more through our website at datadoubles.org, and we're on Twitter at DataDoubles. Thank you so much for the time today, and I'm here to take your questions.